On this episode, we talk to environmental journalist James Fahn to hear his thoughts on Thailand's relationship with nature.
So, if you've ever had that sinking feeling in Bangkok or wondered whether Thailand was getting better or worse environmentally, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 after putting pineapple on my poutine and getting chased out of town.
That's a no-no. Sorry, dude. And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 22 years ago, fell in love with walking barefoot down the flooded sois of Bangkok, especially Sukhumvit, so I never left.
That's a gambling game, man.
It sure is. But
how many steps until I get a cut?
I honestly did it 20 years ago, and then I did it last week on the way to our meetup on Soy 22. So it's one of my traditions. I like to do it at least once a year.
Well, at least once every 21 years.
That's right. We want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, a heads up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. On this week's bonus show, we chatted about some of the big names in music that are coming to Bangkok over the next few months, a good sign for Bangkok's concert scene, some thoughts on the very enjoyable meetup we had last week, despite the apocalyptic rainstorm that some of our hardy listeners braved to join us, as well as a few final thoughts on my classroom rules, including an email from a listener who says I might want to ease up a bit. To learn how to become a patron, click the support button at the top of our website.
Right, and as always, if you have a comment, a show idea, or just want to say hi, head to bangkokpodcast.com and click the little microphone button on the bottom right to leave us a voicemail that we can play on the show. And real quick before we get into it, speaking of the meetup, we want to say a big thanks to everyone who showed up. It was a very, very wet and floodful night, but it was really cool to see about 20-25 people show up, way more than I expected.
Absolutely, given the apocalypse taking place.
That's right, yeah, right. But great time, man. We have some of the best listeners. They're just super friendly and fun and cool, and I really enjoyed meeting everyone. A special shout out to Conrad and Neil for coming up from Chonburi.
Wow.
Nigel and others, a few others who came in all the way from Lad Prow. Keep in mind, this is in the middle of like this epic flood rainstorm where the traffic was just at a standstill.
That's right, yeah.
Greg, I like him already because of his name, obviously, but he brought us a nice bottle of booze.
Yes, that was much appreciated.
Yeah, it's at my place, so if you want some, you're going to have to come over and get it, man.
Our old French friend Guy showed up as well.
Yeah, that's right, Guy. Monsieur Guy was there. And thanks to everyone who battled the floods and dealt with the canceled grab cars and walked through knee-high water to get there. So it was a very fun evening, and we're going to have another meetup before the end of the year.
Yes,
so
we are.
Hope to see you there.
A proper one, hopefully without a torrential downpour.
Hopefully. Those are rare in December. All right. Well, on this episode, we are going to talk to a fellow by the name of James Fahn. Now, James is the executive director of Internews' Earth Journalism Network, a global community of over 5,000 reporters who cover environmental topics. He's a journalist who has primarily focused on environmental issues in developing countries, and he is an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, where he teaches a graduate level class on international environmental reporting. Now, what does it have to do with Thailand? Well, he spent the bulk of his professional career based in Thailand, where he was a reporter and editor for The Nation and hosted a Thai feature television show. His book, A Land on Fire, published in 2003, recounts the issues and scandals he uncovered while working on the environment beat in Southeast Asia. And if you know anything about Southeast Asia and how it works, that can be a very dangerous job. James was recently back in Thailand on a trip, and a mutual friend put us in touch to chat about what he's seen on his return trip, how it compares to what he covered in his 2003 book, and what's in store for Bangkok and Thailand, both good and bad, when it comes to the environment. So here is my conversation with James Fahn. All right, well, our guest this week is a young fellow by the name of James Fahn, whose acquaintance I recently made through a very serendipitous friend of a friend situation going on. So a day or two before he flies out, I'm sitting down here chatting with him tonight. James, welcome to the Bangkok Podcast.
Thank you, Greg. Nice to be here.
So for those that don't know your work, we mentioned it in the introduction. We just did a little bit, but a little while ago, you wrote a book called "A Land on Fire," and let me just read the first blurb from Amazon, if you don't mind, just to sort of give a summary of the book. It says, and I might add a sound effect here, dun, 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 the future of Earth's environment will be decided in Asia, home to 60% of the world's population and some of the world's fastest growing economies. And then it goes on to talk about how you're an award-winning journalist and a great writer. And anyway, this book takes a look at Thailand and its sort of environmental landscape and the situation that it found itself in when you wrote the book. First of all, let's start with what led you to write this book. What were you doing in Thailand at the time, and what made you take on this pretty complicated topic of the environmental situation in Thailand?
Yeah, well, I had originally arrived in Thailand back in 1990 and was hired to become the science and technology editor at The Nation newspaper. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with The Nation, but it was one of the two main English language newspapers, along with the Bangkok Post.
Yeah,
and
it used to be quite a bit bigger deal than it is now.
Yeah, I think it's suffered a bit, as has a lot of the media industry, of course, the news industry. And I was hired to be the science and technology editor. I had a background in science, and we had a weekly section that I took over as editor. And as I became more familiar with the country and living in Bangkok, I just became fascinated with the environmental situation here, as especially at that time, the situation was rather dire. I mean, there was every kind of pollution imaginable. Thailand was growing at, I think, around 10, 12% every year. And it was a very exciting time. I mean, it was a boom, and there's a lot of energy and excitement, and there are great people were getting new opportunities, but there are also all these environmental problems that weren't really being addressed, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, traffic, of course, deforestation, overfishing, just everything imaginable. And I ended up, after a couple of years, switching over to become the environment editor for the newspaper. And we hired a team of about 5 reporters. And for the next 7, 8 years or so, we did a great job of covering environment and natural resources, not just in Thailand, but all around, Southeast Asia, or at least around the Mekong region. It was a fascinating job. Still can't believe how lucky I was to get that. And we did a lot of investigative reporting. We uncovered log smugglers. I did a big report on oil companies dumping mercury in the Gulf of Thailand, and hotel investors encroaching on national parks, and there was a lot of abuse and scandals, and there was a very much a free press and democracy at the time, and it was just a wonderful experience. I actually also, with The Nation, I produced an environmental TV program, a feature program that had focused on a different environmental issue every week. That was, I think, 1998 and 99. Then I returned to the U.S. To go to graduate school, and that's when I wrote the book, just kind of trying to summarize and encapsulate everything I had experienced and learned in this fascinating decade of covering the green beat in Southeast Asia. And as that blurb you read suggested, Asia is going to be crucial to the future of our planet, and it's important we understand how these issues are addressed and seen within an Asian context.
I have to ask, was there a chapter in the book called, "Oh my God, I can't believe how many threats I got from reporting on environmental encroachment in Thailand"? Because, for our listeners, I'm sure most of them know, but if listeners, if you don't, I mean, there have been real serious repercussions for people who are messing with the status quo in terms of that. Let's just say there's a lot of people making a lot of money with illegal logging, illegal forest encroachment, and things like that. And you make too much noise, you're going to get smacked down, sometimes really, really hard. What was your situation there? Obviously, I don't want to go into naming names or anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had to be careful. Of course, we first of all had to make sure we got our facts right, to make sure that we weren't misrepresenting anything. But yeah, we had to be careful. Also, there were threats against us. I think for myself as a Farang, reporter, I think I was in a bit of a privileged position, as I think many Farang are, frankly, in Thailand. I did get threatened with being kicked out of the country. There was a lot of back and forth. But it is a very dangerous profession, and it's gotten probably even more dangerous over the years. And unfortunately, every year there are environmental journalists who are killed, and even more who are threatened or intimidated, or, frankly, practice self-censorship just for their own survival.
Right.
So it is something we have to be aware of. There was at least one time, I can tell you a story, when I was covering an illegal logging case on the border with Myanmar. There was a notorious godfather who was behind it. And I was with a bunch of other Thai journalists. We were driving along a road from Thailand into to a refugee camp, kind of just over the border. There are all these logging trucks piled up on the side of the road, trying to get the logs out because the Burmese army had actually attacked the state, which was kind of under partially rebel control, and so the loggers were rushing to get everything out they could before the Burmese army took over. And there was this big Mitsubishi Pajero there we saw, and that was him. That was the godfather. And I said to my colleagues, I said, "Hey, this is our chance. We can go interview him. Get him on the record." Of course, it was not a smart idea, and my Thai colleagues quickly reasoned with me and say, if you go and show your face to him, you will never be safe the rest of your life. You'll never know when someone will come up behind you on a motorcycle and just shoot you dead. So
good Lord.
They quickly persuaded me not to do that. But that was the kind of thing, we had to be careful of. Eventually his name did come out in the news. So I was happy that happened. But we did have to be careful.
That's crazy. And this is a fairly broad question, but I mean, when little kids are always learning about, my daddy's brave because he's an astronaut or a deep sea scuba diver or a policeman or something like that. For Westerners, it's rarely my daddy's brave because he writes stories about things. It's so much easier to just say, well, it is what it is. There's not much I can do. And journalists don't make a ton of money. What drives you for that?
I just feel like that these stories need to be told, and if we don't tell them, and it's certainly not just me, my current job actually is running a nonprofit program called the Earth Journalism Network, which now has 15,000 journalist members who are all dedicated to covering the environment and climate change. So there are thousands of outstanding journalists out there doing this brave, courageous work, and we're trying to support them in every way we can.
Right.
And I think for all of us, it's like we see what's happening to the world around us. We believe there are better ways to do things, or we at least want to show our audiences what is happening and why, so that hopefully there can be ways to solutions. And I think that desire to tell stories is strong in everyone, in all of us. And for those of us who believe the environment and climate change are important issues, we want to tell stories about these issues any way we can.
So I'm going to ask you a real difficult question now, maybe an impossible one, but for the first, the ending of the first section of this interview, can you sort of give me a quick snapshot takeaway of your book on Thailand, A Land on Fire? When you wrote that book, and at that time, what was your takeaway on Thailand's situation? Was it getting better? Was it getting worse? Were you optimistic? Were you like, I got to get the hell out of here? What was your takeaway on that?
My opinion was, I've always felt there's hope that things could get better, and I did write about a few ways which I did think they were getting better. We can talk more about that in detail if you like. So, but I also, there were certainly some areas that were not getting better, and where there still needed a lot of work to be done. So Overall, I guess I'm an optimist, and I believe there is a way to have the benefits of a strong economy and still be able to protect the environment and the well-being of all of us who rely on our natural resources. Did I answer your question? I don't.
Yeah. Yes, that did. Now the second part, after your trip now in 2022, how has that opinion changed?
I would say I've seen more improvement in some areas over the years. Certainly, things like air pollution uh, in Bangkok, particularly, has gotten better. Um, Actually, another area where we've seen huge improvement is mass transit in Bangkok. Back in the 90s, for instance, we were told that you couldn't build a you know a subway. It was just not physically possible in a city like Bangkok. Well, obviously that is wrong. That was proven wrong. So it was really just an excuse not to do anything. So we have seen. I know traffic is still very bad, but imagine how much worse it would be in Bangkok without the SkyTrain and the MRT.
Right.
So we have seen areas that have been proven, and I'm, happy to talk about why that is. I was really worried. I've always been very worried about the coral reefs in Thailand, because I love snorkeling and scuba diving and just fascinated by the ocean. And the situation was looking very dire, I would say, 10 years ago. And I certainly am not an expert on the situation overall, but I've seen some areas where it's still thriving, the coral, and certainly some areas where it's gone, where it used to be. There used to be reefs, and they're now gone, basically decimated. Right. But some areas they have been protected, and are even trying to. I see, they're regrowing, trying to grow artificial reefs and things like that. So I think there are some ways that has gotten better, and there are other ways where nothing has really changed or it's gotten worse. And one area would be, for instance, plastic, use of plastic. I mean, we know how much Thais love their packaging, and sure. They make beautiful packages. It's gorgeous, but do you really need all that plastic? It's like one of the first things we noticed when we came to Thailand was like we'd come home from a store and just carrying bundles of plastic bags. It was like, how did this happen? And so that's something that can certainly still be improved.
I've ranted about this on the podcast before. My mother-in-law, every single item in the fridge is individually wrapped in a plastic bag with a rubber band around it. And when I take it out and use it again, she puts it back in. And she can't find the original plastic bag. She gets a new plastic bag and puts it back in there. I really wonder about the changing attitudes of both the public and the government, because, I mean, you're familiar with the new forest park in central Bangkok where the old tobacco monopoly used to be.
Yeah.
Right. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And for the longest time, they've been planning it for a decade or more. And until it opened, I didn't believe it, because I'm like, there's no way that much land in the center of Bangkok is going to be given to a park which generates zero income for anyone. But they did it. And I'm so happy to be proven wrong. You hear the odd case of a government project in Chiang Mai, I think, that was built for some Haiso people, and it encroached into a national park or something like that, and they clear cut a bunch of trees, and people were pissed. They were up in arms about it. You see, I think it's Maya Bay in the south now. It's closed for long stretches of time to let the ecology recover, which is a great step. So it seems to me that both the general public and the government are both realizing that they just can't keep steaming into things without thinking about the environmental impact of them and the long-term impact of that. Am I allowed to be cautiously optimistic?
Yeah, I think I would say I feel the same way. It's the park in what do they call Benjaketti Park, I think it's called, in Bangkok, that used to be the Thai tobacco monopoly. I was a journalist at The Nation. I think it was in 1992 or 91 when the Anand Panniarotun government decreed that this should become a national park. Now it's taken, not a national park, a city park. It's taken 30 years, and for a long time, people were very cynical and believe, that they'll never, the tobacco workers will never leave. And But time with time, things do change, or at least they can change, it's very encouraging to see that. There are other areas like Bangkok across the river, from Klong Toi, that was also set aside as a kind of protected area. And I think, if you're looking to escape from the city, that's a really close asset to enjoy some greenery. Certainly a lot more needs to be done. But I do believe, I like to believe at least, that there's more environmental sensitivity, certainly on the public's part. I'm not going to speak for the government because I just don't know enough about their policies. Like you, I think I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, and the reason that I have to include cautiously is because I'm glad you mentioned the Green Lung or Bangkok Chau. I do a lot of bike riding over there, and every time I go over there, there's a little bit more green gone. There's a new building here, there's a new building there. It's happening slowly, and I think in season 2 of the podcast, which was 5 years ago now, we had an interview with my buddy Paul, who lived over there, and he was talking about it, and he had a bike company, and he said the same thing. It's just, and Thailand is not unique in this aspect, but money talks, right? The forest park aside, Benjakiti aside, there's only so long you can hold out against the forces of development and progress and green trees be damned kind of thing. So I think that basically sums up what you said earlier. Like, some things have gotten better, some things have gotten worse, but it's never going to be perfect. I guess, what can we do to make sure that things keep getting better?
I think what we have to keep driving home is the fact that it's not a binary choice. It doesn't have to be help the economy or help the environment. I think that's a false dichotomy that's often put forward by vested interests to get what they want.
Like the people who own the gas companies were saying, no, subway will never work. You got to drive.
We've seen time and time again how, protecting the environment unleashes so much wealth. And I think great example in my hometown of New York was what happened when they cleaned up the waterways. Fifth Avenue in New York City is considered prime property. And the reason it was regionally was because it's far away from the rivers, which stank to high heaven because they were filled with sewage. But, slowly over many decades, the city and the country invested in cleaning up sewage. And then the waterfront areas just boomed. And it created trillions of dollars in wealth in real estate value. Can you imagine what Bangkok would be like if the canals and the rivers were all cleaned up? I mean,
God.
It would be beautiful. It would be amazing to have a house along a klong that was actually clean and maybe, dare I say, even swimmable. Hang
on now. You've only written one book here.
So they cleaned up. I think they've done a decent job of tackling air pollution. I know it's still be a problem, but I was kind of disappointed that the water isn't cleaner these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have an upcoming guest is I think in season 6 now, so maybe in season 4 we had an interview with Kunwina from the Thailand Clean Air Network, and she's coming back on the show to give us an update on what's going on. So that's interesting. So there's movement there. There's public awareness around that. What you said about the klongs is really interesting because it sort of is the flip side of the coin about what I said about money talks. And yeah, money always talks when you're cutting down trees and building skyscrapers, but it can also talk the other way. Like Klong Ong Ang is a good example. It used to be this crappy old klong covered by bridges and markets, and it was full of garbage, but they cleaned it up, and now it's a mega tourism draw. Of course, it opened just before the pandemic, so kind of got shafted there, but so you can see now that, like you said, you protect these natural resources and you turn them into something that does generate money, and the rewards are immediate and ongoing. So that's a situation, I guess, where money talks in a good way. So you see it in Klong Ong Ang, and you see more development along the river, and it's not always done for the most noble pursuits, right. But there are projects out there that are working in the right direction and will benefit the community and the country as a whole.
Right, and I think it's the same with national parks. I believe, like when they created Khao Yai, National Park, which is a pretty sizable park. It was not easy, but once they protected that, so many people wanted to live near there, and we see that in a lot of cases when you have national parks, they become not just places where wildlife can thrive or where tourists can enjoy beautiful scenery. They become huge economic drivers for tourism and for hopefully sustainable tourism. So we see over and over again how protecting the environment and growing the economy can go hand in hand if it's done right.
Now you just got to talk them into not charging 10 times the local rate to get into a national park based on your skin color, but that's a different issue. So as we're wrapping up here now, if you had to write a second book on Thailand's environmental landscape, A Land on Fire Part 2, what would you write about? What would you say?
Well, I'd be really interested in how Thailand is tackling climate change, which I think is really going to be this story of our century. It's going to be the biggest issue we're facing. It already is in many cases. It is already a huge issue, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger as decades go by. When I wrote my first book, I did have a part of a chapter on climate change. I covered the Kyoto summit, but it was still kind of the efforts to address climate change were still in their infancy. And of course, a lot has happened since then, and it would be really interesting to look at what Thailand is and isn't doing in that regard, because it's a very vulnerable country, especially pretty much all tropical countries are vulnerable, but especially any place with a major city or that's low lying like Bangkok is. There's a huge amount of wealth that is and livelihoods that are vulnerable, and not just to sea level rise, but to extreme weather events and to heat waves and to floods and potentially drought in some areas. And so like many countries, Thailand is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like almost all of us really. What is it doing? I would be really interested to know more about what is Thailand's strategy when it comes to addressing climate change. Thailand seems to me, for instance, so much sunshine, it should have a huge solar energy sector.
Yeah.
I understand it's growing pretty quickly, but I'm kind of surprised that there aren't more solar panels on roofs. So I guess in answer to your question, if I would write another book on the subject, it would be about how is Thailand, and not just Thailand, but the region as a whole, how are they addressing climate change, or what are they doing, and what should they be doing?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We have had a solar energy person on who worked at the World Bank, I think, on solar energy projects a couple of seasons ago too. And I can't remember exactly what he said. It was quite technical, but I think the takeaway was it's real complicated. It's not as simple as saying, well, the rich oil companies don't want it, so it doesn't happen. It's just it sounds cool, but it's not that easy. The same discussion that I had with Kunwina from the Thailand Clean Air Network about why isn't Thailand covered in electric tuk-tuks? For some reason, that would be great, but it's not as easy. No one can wave a magic wand and make that happen. But, I think this conversation sums up the issue itself, and Bangkok too, is there's no simple solution. It's a very complicated patchwork existence. And it's just a process of baby steps, whether it be Bangkok putting in a subway and cleaning up its canals, or whether it's people's awareness of climate change and making small little changes that eventually add up to big changes. So I think it's just baby steps.
Yeah, things can change slowly, but then sometimes they can change quickly, especially if we start to run into real crisis. So it'll be interesting to see how well Thailand takes, say, to electric cars or to solar power. Or I know Thailand does have its own natural gas resources in the Gulf, of course, but Thailand's not a major oil and gas producer that I know of. They do produce gas, obviously, but so they have every incentive to turn to renewables just for the sake of energy independence, right?
Right.
Not to mention the environment and other factors. So I know there are people doing really interesting, important work in this area. But as you say, it is very complicated. There's a whole energy market and regulations that have to be dealt with. And we see that not just in Thailand, we see that all over the world. So it'll be very interesting to watch that over the coming decade or so and see how that progresses.
Well, when you write your second book, let us know. We'll have you back on to talk about it. But in the meantime, everyone, if you can't do what you can, don't wrap everything in your fridge in a plastic bag, and just do what you can. Be cognizant of the situation and do what you can. That's all we can ask.
Plastic, there's been a huge increase in awareness all over the world about plastic, especially in the ocean, and everything that we throw away eventually ends up in the ocean. If it doesn't end up in a landfill. And so I believe Thailand is one of the world's largest producers of plastic waste. So that is certainly an area I think that can be improved.
Yeah, right. Well, James, thanks so much for taking the time on your last few days here in Thailand to chat with us. And check out the book on Amazon. It is called A Land on Fire. And it looks pretty cool. I haven't read it, obviously, because we just met, but it's available in all formats, Kindle, paperback, etc. So, And do you have a blog, a website? Where can people read more about your work?
Well, they should check out earthjournalism.net. That's the home of our Earth Journalism Network. And there we have stories from all over the world about every environmental issue you can imagine, including, of course, many stories about Thailand. There was, like, for instance, one story I know that we did in Isan. It was a landfill that was leaking toxic waste.
Ugh.
And as a result of the story, I believe the local authorities promised to try and clean it up. So journalism can make a big difference. And I hope everyone out there will support their local journalists and the local media outlets, because we need them for our environment and for our democracy and our health and just the well-being of our society.
That's right. Well said. Well, James, thank you very much, sir. It's been a pleasure. And we'll have you back on for A Land on Fire Part 2. Hopefully it'll be called A Land Not on Fire.
Thank you, Greg. It's nice to talk to you.
Man, that was a great interview. Thank you, James, for coming on the show. We appreciate it. Thank you, our buddy John, for leading us to James.
Yeah.
He had a really cool job. Now, granted, it was risky and potentially dangerous, but that's a cool job, man.
Yeah, it's an important job and a cool job. But yeah, like I said, man, in Southeast Asia, you're writing about, things that people are doing that are sort of on the wrongs, just over the line between legal and illegal. And, they're going to clap back, as the kids say. And it can be dangerous, like that story he told where he was, had to leave real quick.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're uncovering any type of corruption, it's just you're at risk. But that's just what journalists do. I guess it depends on what kind of journalist you are. But I appreciate it. Every time I read it, someone's got to do it. And it's a good service for the community for sure.
Yeah, I really liked his insights too, because it's something I think about a lot. With my son, who's 7, like, I'm really curious, what's Bangkok going to look like in 30 years?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Do I have to sort of start formulating a plan in my mind? Like, well, we've got 20 years left in Bangkok, and then we got to get the hell out. Because,
right.
I don't want my son to be taking a little canoe to school.
That's right. Man, there's so many environmental issues here. I mean, with the floods, like obviously climate change issues. There's so many, and we've said it before. It just doesn't seem like not anyone, but it doesn't seem like there's a proper response from the government, right?
Yeah. It's almost like, well, what if I was in the government? Someone said that, I'd be like, well, what should I do? Take another klong? Like, it just seems so overwhelming, right?
True that it is. No doubt, it's a big problem.
Yeah. So thanks very much, James, for coming on the show. It was cool to talk to you. And I think I got him like literally a few hours before he flew out of Thailand. So thanks again, sir. And I hope to see you again back here one day where I can buy you a beer.
So he got out to safety.
That's right. He left us poor saps here.
Got out of Dodge. So funny.
Yeah. All right. Well, one of the new segments we want to try in this new season is something we call Would You Rather, where one of us picks a contrasting situation tied to Thailand to debate and choose which one we'd prefer. So this week it is you, Ed.
All right, dude. I got to admit, this is a little bit of an impossible choice, especially for a Canadian. But for me as an American, this is an interesting thing.
Right.
Everyone knows that Canadians are basically nicer versions of Americans. And, the way I think of Canadians is they're just kind of folksy and more chilled out. So Canadians are just kind of famously easy to get along with.
Folksy. I would say that's pretty good word, yeah.
But Thai people are also famously easy to get along with.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah.
Now you've been in Thailand for 20 years. Mm-hmm. You're totally acclimated. So if you're meeting someone, do you really prefer meeting a Canadian with the relaxed folksiness, Canadian folksiness, versus Thai pleasant charm, the smiling charm of Thai people. We have two famously nice people. Let's pit them against each other.
Now fight. No way.
Who's nicer? What would you rather hang out with folksy Canadians or smiling, charming, friendly Thais?
Man, that's a real hard one. I mean, it's one of those situations where if I choose one, it doesn't mean I'm not choosing the other.
That's right.
Right? Like I don't want to exclude the other group.
This would be a perfect question for like a Swedish person or someone from Brazil. You know, it's like it's because you're biased because you're Canadian, or in a way we're biased because we're Western. But right. I wonder what, like, if we just picked a totally neutral country and you're like, would you rather, you know, assuming let's say there was no language barrier. So let's say everybody spoke English. Like if you're from Lithuania, like would you rather hang out with Canadians or Thais? Like that's the question.
You know, I'm gonna go Thais, because if I met a Canadian, and you know, I love meeting Canadians, and it's always great to sort of get that out of the way. Oh, where are you from? Oh, from Ottawa. Oh, yeah, I lived there when I was. Oh, yeah, I lived there. I traveled there. And what do you think? Oh, have you been to this place? Like once that's out of the way,
right?
That's really all I know. I pretty much know most things about that person, besides like, you know, the personal stories and where, you know,
right.
And do you have kids and stuff. But if it's with a Thai, all things considered, there's still a lot I can learn about them culturally.
Especially if, right,
Canadian person, I kind of get an idea of where they're coming from.
Yeah. It's funny because I thought you were going to say Canadian, but I think I would also choose Thai. Now this is, of course, assuming that we had solved the language barrier. If there's a language barrier, it's going to be much easier for me to hang out with Canadians, of course. But if my Thai was much better, or if I'm with Thai speaking English, I am a sucker for the Thai smile. And the friendliness, like even though these are two famously friendly cultures, Canadians are more just laid back and chill, as opposed to smiley. Whereas Thais are just have that social charm that I'm a sucker for. You know, that I actually talked about last week. That's one of the reasons I stay here. That it just makes social interaction so easy. That they're just so nice and non-confrontational. Now. But, you know, I guess the asterisk would be language issues. But if without the language issues, I think I'd rather hang out with some Thais. No offense to my Canadian friends. I like to hang out with Canadians as well. But I'm just a sucker for the Thai smile, man.
Yeah, like I'm not saying I don't want to hang out with Canadians, but there's that opportunity if I'm with Thais to learn a little bit more culturally.
True that.
Educate myself a little bit more than I would.
Well, that's why it's called Would You Rather. That's why it's called Would You Rather. You got to choose. You got to make some difficult choices here on the Bangkok Podcast.
Impossible decisions. Nice one.
All right. Well, at least we agree on something. Alrighty. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yes, we do. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail through our website that will feature on the show, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter, where I am PKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone. Stay dry, and we will see you back here next week.
Absolutely.